think it's safe to say that Christianity is all about Jesus. Jesus being born as a man, dying on the cross, and then rising again. So the all-important question has to be, how can we be sure that Jesus is real?
Well, this is such an important question. The whole of Christianity actually just rests on the person of Jesus. And if you think about it, the very name of our religion is Christianity, Christianity. And we're called, as followers of Jesus, well, we're named after him, Christians or Christians. So the existence of Jesus for our faith, and I would say for all of humankind, is crucial, both his existence in history and today.
Okay. So, is there any evidence that Jesus really did exist in history?
Well, of course, there's lots of evidence, there's loads, and the greatest amount would exist in this book, unsurprisingly, the Bible. The New Testament, the second half, is all about Jesus. You could say the whole Bible is about Jesus, but certainly the New Testament. The New Testament gives us the greatest wealth of information. It explains who Jesus is, why he came. So this has to be the most important place to look. Now, I know that some people have issues whether they can trust this or not, and we're going to deal with that in our second question. But let's just say for now that this is our prime source of evidence. And if you want to know about Jesus, this is the place to look. Of course, this is not the only evidence, though, that Jesus did exist in history.
Okay. So then, what other evidence outside the Bible is there for the existence of Jesus in history?
Well, shall I deal with some Roman writers?
Okay.
So some Roman writers of the 1st and 2nd century. The most famous Roman historian is Tacitus of the time, and he's the one who talks about the Emperor Nero and the Great Fire of Rome, AD 64. Nero quite clearly started that fire, or was responsible, but he then made the Christian community scapegoats. He blamed them. So would you like to read what Tacitus says about this?
I will. Nero fastened the guilt and inflicted the most exquisite tortures on a class hated for their abominations, called Christians by the populace. Christus, from whom the name had its origin, suffered the extreme penalty during the reign of Tiberius at the hands of one of our procurators, Pontius Pilate.
So let's just check what Tacitus is saying there. Firstly, he gives us evidence that a group of people called Christians did exist in Rome in AD 64. Of course, they had to exist if they were to be blamed. But then we see that they're called Christians after their leader, Christus, which is a Roman form of the Greek word Christ, the title of Jesus. He then goes on to say that this leader, Christ, suffered the extreme penalty, namely death, under Pontius Pilate during the reign of Tiberius. Amazing evidence that dovetails with the Bible, backing up the fact that Jesus Christ really did live and die during the reign of Tiberius Caesar, and many followed him and were even willing to die for their faith.
Okay, well that really is quite amazing. Are there any other Romans you want to mention?
Well, I'd like to mention Pliny the Younger. Now, Pliny became the governor of an area called Bithynia, which, if you looked on a map today, you'd look in northwestern Turkey. And Pliny was good mates with the Roman emperor of the time. The Roman emperor was called Trajan, and they wrote each other letters. Many of those letters survive today. And in one of these letters, Pliny is concerned about what to do with a group of people called Christians. And he's saying, look, what do I do with these guys? They're meeting together on a fixed day to chant verses in honour of Christ as if to God. Now, Pliny was disgusted by this because they should be chanting verses to the Roman emperor as to God, not this Christ fellow. So he's very upset. It's evidence, though, that Christians existed and worshipped Jesus as God very early on. And then Pliny has this to say as well. He says, I've asked them if they are Christians, and if they admit it, I repeat the question a second and third time, with a warning of the punishment awaiting them. If they persist, I order them to be led away for execution. So he's saying that these Christians were so strong in their faith that they were prepared to die for their belief that Jesus is real and is their God. Now, I could go on and talk about Suetonius, another Roman, but I think that's enough Romans now.
Fair enough. What about any non-Romans who talk about Jesus?
Well, I'd like to quote from this book here, a large book, the works of a famous Jewish historian of the time called Josephus. And as you can see, I have marked a few pages which talk about Jesus. On one page, he says this. I'll just find it. He talks about the brother of Jesus, who was called Christ, whose brother was James, and some others. And when he had formed an accusation against them as breakers of the law, he delivered them to be stoned. That's talking, I think, about a chap called one of the Jewish leaders anyway. But what we see there is that Jesus is real. He had a brother called James. He was called Christ. And the Jewish leaders got so upset with these followers of Christ that they wanted to stone them. There's another wonderful quote in here, and I'm going to hand this over for you to read. It's just down there.
Okay. It says, "Now there was about this time Jesus, a wise man, if it be lawful to call him a man, for he was a doer of wonderful works, a teacher of such men as received the truth with pleasure. He drew over to him both many of the Jews and many of the Gentiles. He was the Christ. And when Pilate, at the suggestion of the principal men amongst us, had condemned him to the cross, those that loved him at the first did not forsake him. For he appeared to them alive again the third day, as the divine prophets had foretold these and 10,000 other wonderful things concerning him. And the tribe of Christians, so named from him, are not extinct at this day." Okay.
Staggering, isn't it?
That's quite a bit of evidence.
Yes, and so really no serious scholar today would doubt that a person called Jesus existed in history during the time of Tiberius Caesar, and that he was killed during the time of Pontius Pilate, the procurator in Palestine.
Okay. So, we've got evidence from the New Testament in the Bible. We've got Roman writers. We've got non-Roman writers. Is there anything else you feel that you need to say before we close this question? Is Jesus real?
Only to say, I think we ought to include the very real experiences of Christians throughout the ages. You see, many Christians will say that they have had their lives personally changed through encountering Jesus. They believe he's alive today. Now, many people might say that's subjective, but I think it's still important evidence to the reality of Jesus. He changes people. And there's physical evidence as well. When I was in Cambodia, I met people who said they showed me they had received physical healing through the power of Jesus. So I'd say, on the basis of all this evidence, that Jesus is real in history, and he is alive today and at work today, which is great news for us all.